because I have the pleasure of introducing the fantastic Ash Maier. Woo! All right, Ash! So Ash, very sadly, is at the end of what has been a fabulous internship with us here at Hurricane Island. So her project was part of the Aqueous program from UMaine, which focuses on Western and Indigenous aquaculture practices. So we were so fortunate to have her join us all the way from the West Coast in Oregon. And today she is going to tell you all about what she has done over the last 10 weeks. But I have to say, Ash, it has been such a pleasure to see you work and to see you grow. And this is not goodbye. So join me in welcoming Ash.
Hi everyone, I'm Ash. I'm a research intern here at Hurricane, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the project I worked on this summer that was over biodegradable solutions and Scallop aquaculture sustainability. So Maine's aquaculture industry goes back to the late 1800s and has only grown stronger ever since. The abundant coastline provides a unique opportunity for a wide range of food production to happen here. And since 2007, the industry has seen its total economic impact increase and nearly triple, going from $50 to $137 million annually. Because Maine's coast is so abundant and the aquaculture industry here is so strong, we decided to run this project out of Hurricane Island, which sits within the Fox Island archipelago. Here we have a 3.2-acre experimental lease, and our farm is home to roughly 9,000 scallops. We were looking at scallops specifically because shellfish aquaculture is very sustainable. You don't need any additives to keep the scallops alive, and the scallops themselves filter the water around them. Scallops are also pretty high in value, sitting just under some lobsters at $13.99 per pound here in Maine. In 2017, Maine alone produced $9.3 million worth of scallops, and the demand for scallops is only continuing to grow. To understand our project, you kind of have to understand what biofouling is. And biofouling is just the accumulation of undesired micro and macroorganisms on a submerged surface. So microfouling is referring to bacteria, algae at the beginning of its lifestyle, and other larval organisms. And macrofouling refers to larger organisms that you can see with your eyes, like mussels, oysters, tunicates. And here you can see some of the biofouling that we saw most often here on our experimental farm. So as our climate changes and the seas warm, biofouling is changing and impacting farmers more. As you can see from our graph of representative concentration pathways, which is just the 3 lines at the end that are diverging, no matter what warming pathway we end up on, the water is going to continue warming, which means we are going to continue seeing an increase in settlements and colonization on submerged objects. Biofouling as a whole is a problem for farmers because it causes an increase in drag weight. Some studies have seen up to a 54% in drag weight, which just means that the gear you're hauling out of the water is a lot heavier and harder to haul. To account for this, farmers have to use more fuel to haul the heavy gear, which means they're also increasing their greenhouse gas emissions. And the fouling organisms also damage your gear, specifically around the closing mechanisms like the zippers. And the weight also accounts for a risk of losing your gear, which means you're not only adding plastic pollution and losing your gear, but you've now lost your profitable product. Biofouling also increases operating costs. Here in Maine, studies show that 14.7% of annual operating costs go to dealing with biofouling. And on top of that, they also affect the product growth by physically damaging some products like growing on them. They change the biological composition of the surrounding environment and reducing water and food supply to these products. And while it isn't really seen in scallop aquaculture, it is seen in fish aquaculture where some fouling organisms carry pathogens that will affect the fish and then eventually kill them. And since our waters are changing and we're seeing different species and more species, it's not something that's out of the realm of possibilities. So historically, we don't know a lot about historical aquaculture and much less about how they dealt with fouling. What we do know is that fouling has been a problem ever since humans put boats in the water. The earliest written records of anti-fouling of any kind date back as far as 412 BC and can be attributed to the Phoenicians and Carthaginians, which were ancient seafaring people in the Mediterranean Sea. They used things like copper plating, wax, pitch, tar, asphalt to coat the bottom of their boats to prevent fouling. And as you can probably tell, it's not super environmentally friendly, and there was never any record of it being used in aquaculture, and it's certainly not used now. Currently, to deal with fouling, we use things like pressure washers, hot dip tanks, experimental solutions, and simply just drying the nets out and scraping the biofouling creatures off. And these solutions are fine. They're just kind of expensive and not very accessible to a lot of people. Pressure washers can go anywhere from $159 to $65,000. The cheaper your pressure washer, the more likely it is to break. Hot dip tanks are about $50,000. Experimental solutions can only be used in a very controlled environment, and even if we ignore that, they're also pretty expensive. And even the simplest solution and cheapest solution of leaving them out to dry requires a lot of labor, and it requires farmers to have extra nets to transfer their products into while they're cleaning them. And this is why we were testing Ocean Farm Supply's compostable solution, which uses beechwood cellulose fibers woven together to create a 100% biodegradable and plastic-free lantern net cover. The beechwood itself is harvested using sustainable and regenerative forestry practices and carbon-neutral production processes. Not only are they an environmentally friendly solution to biofouling, but we are hoping they will be a cheaper option for smaller businesses. And here you can just see a very foul lantern net, a clean lantern net, and our covers right before they were deployed here in July. To test the efficacy of these biodegradable covers on biofouling, we deployed 3 treatments with 5 replicates, so 5 nets each, over the course of 3 separate month-long time periods. We deployed in May, we deployed in July, and we're going to deploy again in September. Our first treatment was a tomato cage with just the cover, and this was a control for the cover itself, as it had only ever been tested in a lab setting, so it only had fresh water. So this was just to see if salt water affected it differently and if it would still break down the same way. Our second treatment was a regular lantern net with scallops, and was also a control. And our third treatment was the lantern net with the cover and the scallops. To quantify biofouling, we used a 25 by 25 centimeter quadrat to collect and analyze our data. We used visualization and estimation to determine the percentage of biofouling abundance, species composition, and cover quality of the nets. We sampled 4 times per replicate on set vertical lines and randomized levels of the nets. And we also took pre and post weights of the nets to collect hard data on just how much biofouling was weighing these nets down over the course of that month. On top of biofouling data, we were also collecting data on scallop health and growth by taking pre and post measurements of shell height and meat, gonad, total viscera, and shell weights. While we didn't really hypothesize that the cover would have any effect, positive or negative, on these scallops, it was really important to keep track of this data, because if scallops were negatively impacted, these nets are completely useless regardless of how well they break down and how well they keep biofouling off of the nets. And we also were looking at sediment carbon accumulation. So we took pre and post collections of the benthic sediment cores. 5 15-centimeter cores were collected below each treatment, so 1 under each replicate in the treatment, and homogenized into 1 representative core for external analysis. We are doing this because we are hoping that once the covers degrade off and sit on the ocean floor, they will pull down carbon and help sequester carbon rather than putting it into the atmosphere. And now that I told you all about biofouling, our experiment, it is time to look at our data and see if it even worked. When weighing our lantern nets, we removed the scallops and the biodegradable cover so we could narrow down just how much the cover prevented biofouling from forming on the lantern net itself. On this graph, you can see the y-axis is the lantern net weight in kilograms, and the x-axis is the pre-trial and post-trial of the regular lantern net and the lantern net that had the biodegradable cover on it. And as you can see from the graph, in our post-experiment weights, the regular lantern nets increased by 25% in weight, while the lantern nets with the cover only increased by 5%. So this goes to tell us that these covers do in fact keep the lantern nets cleaner. And you can see this when you look at the photo. The one with no cover is a lot more foul than the one without the cover. And as I mentioned, we were looking at scallop growth. This graph focuses on the meat weight of scallops as it is the part being sold to the market, and arguably more important to farmers, this is the data they want to see. So on our graph, you can see that the y-axis is representing scallop meat weight in grams, and the x-axis is looking at the pre-trial and post-trial weights of, again, the lantern net and the lantern net with the biodegradable cover on it. In July, we saw almost no difference in the treatments or with their pre-trial weights, and we're thinking that this is because in July, scholars are focusing on growing their reproductive organs and preparing to spawn. So this is kind of to be expected that they're not growing very much in their meat weight. The biggest thing you need to take away from this graph is that the scallops were not negatively impacted by the biodegradable cover. Alright, so in conclusion, not only are these biodegradable covers sustainable and environmentally friendly, but our results show that they do decrease the weight of the lantern nets they cover, leaving them cleaner and much easier for farmers to maintain. Our results also show that the covered lantern nets do not have any negative impact on these scallops themselves. This means that this solution could very well decrease the cost and labor needed to deal with biofouling in the aquaculture industry. So this was just year one of our project. In year two, we will be replicating year one's experiment on Hurricane's Experiential farm and also on pen-based Scallop farm. We'll be testing the effectiveness of these biodegradable nets under different interannual conditions and validating whether or not our experimental results are applicable to real-world working farms. And before I go, I have to give a shout out to our awesome research team. All of them have been incredible mentors to me, and I am so thankful to have worked with them. All right, and now I'm going to turn the floor back to everyone here. If you have any questions, I am absolutely happy.
So you found that the covers are reusable. Can they be used more than one time?
Once they break down, no. So they will eventually slop off onto the floor. Yeah. But we think they last, in our long completeness, they last about 11 weeks. So pretty long time.
Hi. So any kind of like early ideas or how to cut the amount of time it takes to create the covers and apply the covers to the pages? Because I know I was here for like the hand stitching of them onto the lanterns. So I'm curious about kind of expediting that process.
So that's a really great question. I am not sure how long Erin spends making these, but this is a very new idea. Right now we're really focusing just on making it work. I think eventually, if they do work really well and they can be used in a mass production way, we'll eventually like an assembly line situation going on. But yeah, I don't have an exact answer to your question just yet.
I'm going to follow that up because I was also wondering how you actually got the beechwood nets around your winter net and like how much time that took and how you might market that to commercial.
So once we get them, they're really easy to apply. I'm not sure how long it takes Erin to make them again, but we get them in like their little cylinder form and then we just put them over the top and slide it down. I think it took us max 30 seconds to get it on.
Cool. It looked like it would take longer.
If you sewed it on, yeah, 100%. Any other questions?
I was thinking about the nets that are coming off and degrading. Do you have some sense of the impact on other species, or like where does that go and how long does it take?
So I think the sediment cores will tell us a little bit about that, but I'm not so sure how it's affecting the surrounding environment. I don't think it is affecting them very much because it is a natural product that's biodegrading. Anya, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say that'll also be a perfect year too. So like when they go down and dive for sediment cores, we can also do surveys of the benthic environment down there. But they, they break down really from those pictures that Ash showed of the lab results. They break down really quickly, like fully. So if you're thinking about that being down at the bottom, we're hypothesizing that they'll get incorporated into that sediment pretty quickly and be minimally invasive.
And they don't break down in like strings, so they're not getting caught on any of the animals. They're like shredding themselves and really tiny little particles.
Well, I have a question, like, can you go back to the slide where you were showing the lantern piece trials?
Yeah.
This is the one. So can you like explain a bit of it, because I wanted to understand more specifically when we see the post trials. It's in the range of 5. So what it really does mean, So
yeah, just explain the graph.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm on the screen. So So these two are the pre-trial weights for the lantern net and the biodegradable cover nets. So they're about the same, as why they have little A's next to them. They were coming in between 4.5 and 5 kilograms. When we weighed them, we took our covers off and we held them out of the water for a minute so that they would be the most likely to have the same weights if they were the same weights. And due to the biofouling organisms, the light box, that is our lantern nets without the covers, they were a lot more biofouled, between 5.5 and 6 kilograms. And once we took the covers off of our lantern nets, they were sitting around 4.5 and 5, so they were still relatively similar to their pre-trial weights. Does that help?
Yeah, all right. So actually, I was just looking with the unit,
Yeah.
so which is 5.5 kilograms.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something.
I
All
can
right,
fit.
great.
So 11 weeks is kind of, I know we're trying to figure out how long they last. Do you see this being used as keep replacing them, or is there an 11-week period of time in the life of a scallop that you want to?
That's a really great question. I think a lot of this goes into seeing how much we can decrease the labor cost for farmers. I think I have a graph on this back end that might help me a little bit more. So that's not what I want. Yeah. So this really terrible yellow line is the biofouling that starts up after our lantern nets start degrading. So it's still not at 100% by any means. So kind of what we're hoping is that it'll stay in the water, cover these lantern nets, not be as heavy, and help prevent the biofouling. And then once they go to pull it out at the end of the season, which it's like 3-month season, it won't be as heavy. And what we saw in May with our scallop weight results was the scallops in the covered nets were actually significantly heavier than the ones in our regular lantern nets. So we're kind of hoping that when scallops are not worried about spawning and breeding, that they will be bigger at the end of the season with these covered nets. Anything else? Thank you guys. Sorry.